Ladies and gentlemen, I think we're going to get started. So if everybody can, we need quiet on the set.
Quiet on the set.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, okay, you're a little late. Now that you're here, I guess we can start,
All right,
right?
Bruce is here. Let's get started now.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start now. So, welcome, and thank you all for attending, and for those of you on 1623 tuning in to the second of 3 candidates' housing forums sponsored by the community organization Housing4All Gloucester. And before we get started, I also want to thank 1623 Studios for broadcasting and taping this, and Gloucester Stage Company for being a gracious host for these 3 forums. My name is Paul Lundberg, and I will be the moderator for this evening's festivities. I was the moderator last week for the Councilors at Large. In addition to my business career in railroad operations, I was 6 years on the Gloucester Planning Board and 6 years on the Gloucester City Council, my last term as the president of the City Council, which both of those experiences is a great way to learn about housing and zoning, because that's how it all works. Tonight's forums and all the forums are the creation of this wonderful new civic group, Housing4All Gloucester. Their mission statement is as follows. They are a community organization focused on solutions to increase fair, affordable, and environmentally sustainable housing. And among their goals are advocate for and pursue a range of policies, planning, and projects to increase affordable housing options, both rental and home ownership, that respond to the current economic and environmental challenges that we face. So as a premise for these forums, we've kind of put together a couple of sentences that describe the premise. And that premise is both a community and a campaign issue. And that premise is Gloucester has a housing problem characterized by the lack of affordable housing for working families and seniors. This shortage of affordable housing is changing the character of our community. Now, that's a premise that people can debate and argue about, and that's the whole purpose of these forums. But I will point out 2 small facts to highlight that premise. The first one was, as part of the 400-plus celebration this year, the 400th Committee had this wonderful forum at City Hall of 5 former mayors and the current mayor to talk about their vision of the city, their experiences as mayor. And all 6 of these individuals said that the biggest problem facing our town is housing and affordable housing. One other factoid, there's a lot of facts out there, and we can debate what they mean, but the one that caught my eye was about the Gloucester Public School Census. So in the year 2000, we had 30,000 people in Gloucester and 4,000 students in Gloucester Public Schools. Today, 30,000 population, but only 2,700 students in the Gloucester Public Schools. Again, there's probably a lot of reasons why, but one of the reasons is that families with children are having trouble affording a house in Gloucester. So, Housing4All of Gloucester and these candidates have a shared goal of ensuring that the Gloucester voters have the best information about the candidates. So to do that, Housing4All Gloucester created and circulated a questionnaire with 12 questions and created these 3 public forums. We had one for the councilors at large last week, tonight for the mayor candidates, and Wednesday night for the ward councilor candidates. And all candidates were invited to complete the questionnaire and participate in all of these forums. So last Thursday, 5 of the 6 Counselor-at-Large candidates submitted written answers to the questionnaire and appeared on this stage. The answers to their questionnaires and the video of the forum are posted online for anybody who missed them. And I will say that it's worth watching because the city councilors actually did their homework, and I was so proud of them. A forum featuring the candidates for ward councilors is scheduled for this Wednesday here at Gloucester Stage. So this evening, one of the 2 candidates for mayor, Greg Verga, has submitted the written answers to the questionnaire and has agreed to appear on this stage. The second candidate, Mary Ellen Rose, declined the invitation to appear on this stage. Ms. Rose did not submit answers to the questionnaire and did not accept our offer to submit a written statement to be read this evening at the forum. So, as a result of that, we have only one candidate for mayor this evening. We have altered our format a little bit. It was planned to be a series of questions to each candidate back and forth. But instead of that, candidate Verga and I will have a conversation about the housing problem in Gloucester based on the questionnaire questions. And we will go for approximately 30 minutes. And then candidate Verga has agreed to take questions from the audience for 30 minutes. And these questions should be about housing, but they don't need to be limited to housing. And they may be guided by the moderator, and I will base my guidance on the rules of decorum that we use at the City Council. So with that, I invite candidate Verga to introduce himself for a couple of minutes and tell us what you'd like us to know about your candidacy, Greg.
Great. Well, thank you, Paul, and thank you, Housing for All Gloucester. Can you hear me okay through the mic? Okay.
Yeah.
So a little bit about me. A lot of you may have already heard my story, but born and raised in Gloucester. My mother's grandparents came here in the 1890s. My father's mother and father came around 1912, 1916. And I was grown up here, went to Gloucester Public Schools, raised 3 kids in West Gloucester. Married my wife, Kelly, who's from Lanesville, also a Gloucester girl. And we now have 2 grandchildren living right near us in West Gloucester. I first ran for school committee back in 1999. I did not win, but at that time I had 3 kids, 1 preschooler, 1 in O'Malley, 1 in middle school, and I thought it was time to give back to my community. I had spent 10 years going to school at night to get my degree from Salem State. I ran 2 years later. I served for 8 years on the school committee, went on to serve 4 years as a city council, ward council for Ward 5, then 2 years at large. I ran for mayor in 2015, and as you may have guessed, I didn't win back then. So I took a few years off, became a musician, and worked full-time. And then 2 years ago, I decided to run again for mayor, and I did win, and I've been your mayor for about 22 months, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. And I'm looking forward to another 24 months to make Gloucester an even better place to live, work, and visit. And I'm looking forward to making it a better place for my grandkids and their kids as we move forward into the next 400 years.
Great. Thank you, Greg. And just for everyone's information, when I joined the City Council, my first assignment was on planning and development, and Greg was the chair of planning and development that term. And planning and development is the committee of the council that handles all the zoning issues, and so it's a good place to get a good foundation of knowledge. So with that, we'll start with the questions that we had formulated for this evening's discussion, Greg. The first one is the foundation question. Do you believe that Gloucester has a housing problem? If so, who is impacted, and what do you think we can do to solve the problem?
Well, the first answer is yes. Second answer is almost everybody. And the third thing is to take it seriously and admit that it is a problem and that it is something we can solve incrementally. Not all candidates agree that it's a solvable problem, which I think that defeatist attitude really sets us back. It impacts seniors who can't afford to downsize because there's nowhere for them to go. It's for the younger people who are just getting out of school or just starting families because they can't afford to buy to start out here, and it impacts businesses because the workers can't afford to live here. And as we've seen restaurants close because they can't get staff, and that is the refrain I'm hearing from businesses all over the city, whether it's Applied Materials or a restaurant downtown, if you can't get your staff, you can't run your business. So it impacts everybody, and we have a lot of work to do to start making changes to make it a little better. I know there's going to be a lot of other questions that I can put a little more meat on those bones, so I'll wait for those to get into the details.
Well, that is a good lead into the second question. And as mayor, I'm sure that you have a lot of experience with this next question. So when you speak to your constituents about the housing problem and housing costs, what conclusions do you draw from those conversations? What are people saying to you as the mayor about what's the problem for the individuals?
Well, it's sort of expanding on what I just said, that a lot of people are worried about their kids, that they can't afford to stay in Gloucester. They're worried about their parents because they can't afford to stay in their own homes. And the businesses can't afford to hire people because they can't find places to live. We have a serious issue with not only affordable housing, but just market rate housing. You know, it may be oversimplifying, but a key component to the higher prices is simply the concept of supply and demand. You know, I'll use an example. My father's house, it's a two-family home on Perkins Street. My father passed away in March, and we sold it up on Portuguese Hill for $700,000. I mean, my last sale when I was in real estate was a few houses up. I sold on Perkins Street for $542,000. And at that time, this was about 26 months ago, I was like, I cannot believe we're selling something on Perkins Street for $542,000. Fast forward, you know, less than 2 years, $700,000. So that's what we're up against. We have low demand, high demand, very high demand. In our case, we had multiple over asking offers and very low inventory. So that's the start. How can we get more units into the pipeline, you know, in a reasonable way without just willy-nilly throwing up huge eyesores all over the city? I think we're going to probably get into 3A. I'm guessing that we'll have a lot more to talk about on that one too.
Yes, we will. So I know one of the conversations that we used to have down at City Hall and the City Council and with the budget and all was the importance of having a good school system, because the good school system produces graduates who can be good employees, and that was an attraction to businesses coming to Gloucester.
Right.
Is that the same kind of thing that the businesses are looking at now? Can my employees afford to live in or near Gloucester if I'm going to be a business here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's the affordable rate really isn't affordable, you know, because the AMI, the average median income, is based on the Boston market, you know, the greater Boston area, and we need to figure out how we can get some affordable, deed-restricted affordable housing that's lower, 60 or even 30. But businesses they have a struggle because there's just not a lot of opportunity, a lot of options for people to move into. I mean, if you're looking to come up with first, last security and a rent that's in the $2,500 range, it's almost impossible.
Right. And so, I mean, we have, you know, a wide array of employers in town. We have the small businesses, and I know we could all cite examples of some of our favorite businesses that are closed Sundays because they just don't have enough people. But how about the larger employers, the ones who are the anchors up at Blackburn? Are they having any issues with employees and housing?
They absolutely. So I toured Applied Materials a couple of times over the last 22 months, and that's one thing that they said over and over. They need skilled employees, and you can't get skilled employees if they can't find an affordable place to live. So we are trying all sorts of things. You know, we proposed during my last campaign, taking some city-owned land, you know, seeing what we had available, and possibly spinning it off into affordable housing. We're not builders, we're not developers, we the city, but if we make these parcels available and we can partner with somebody, in the case of the one we proposed for Gloucester Avenue, Harbor Lights, Habitat for Humanity came forward with a proposal for 10 units, 5 duplexes, all 10 deed-restricted affordable housing. That's the way we can move forward. But I'm quoted in my survey, which I did fill out, the questionnaire, Kim Driscoll was at a chamber event, sorry, a Rotary event several months ago, and she said, everybody is for affordable housing until it gets an address. So that is probably one of the biggest hurdles we have, is how can we create affordable housing that fits the character of the neighborhood? Because that's one of the criteria I had when I asked our community development department to come up with some locations, is I'm not looking to build halyards in somebody's neighborhood. I mean, I think halyard works where it is, but you can't necessarily go to street X in Gloucester where there's colonials, then stick these 7-story buildings up. So how do we get something that's affordable housing that fits within the character of the neighborhood, that can be deed restricted at an AMI that makes sense for the city? So we're still working on it. I mean, there are other issues on Gloucester of infrastructure issues we'd like to solve if we were to do an affordable housing project up there. But we have our eyes on other things. We've also, as I've said several times, I rebuilt the Affordable Housing Trust that had been down to, I think, just a couple members when I took over. We've given them a guaranteed source of income via the short-term rental tax. The first year I was in office was about $56,000. Second year is about $65,000. Not tons of money, but it's a guaranteed source of income. And we also put in $1.5 million from the ARPA COVID relief money. So they are ready to go. There are a lot of smart people on that board and a lot of people with some great ideas, and they've got the funding. So we have our eyes out everywhere to see if we can find something.
So one thing that a lot of people may not know, because the Affordable Housing Trust Committee has not gotten a lot of attention over the years.
Yes.
What do you see as their scope? I mean, they are not housing developers per se.
No,
what is their scope? What is their purpose? And are they to advise the city and the mayor as to what we should do, or what? Can you give us some?
Yes, well, they are an
example of
advisory
that?
board to the mayor. They are all volunteers. They do have some varied backgrounds, from real estate to affordable housing and other housing specialties. So it's people who really know what they're talking about and are dedicated to it. It's a matter of, as they're not developers, the city's not developers. We're not sending the vocational school down to build 16 new units. We're not going to send the DPW down. But the secret is to partner with, it's not a secret, it's a well-known fact, to partner with organizations like Habitat for Humanity or Harbor Lights or others, and provide the resources from the city, provide the location possibly through city land, and let them put their expertise to building it and managing it. Because that's the other thing, we're not going to be landlords either.
Right. So if some of the organizations that you mentioned, like Harbor Light Community Development and Habitat for Humanity, when they come to look at doing a project in town, they would be interfacing with, among other people, the Housing Trust as well as the Community Development Department?
Yes, actually, so I saw Andrew DeFranza the other day at the Gloucester 400 Plus Gala. Gloucester 400 is still going on for a few more months, folks, so check out their webpage. And I mentioned to him, because I know they have a project in mind, and I says, give me a call, because we want to hook you up with the Affordable Housing Trust to see where our ideas align. Mm-hmm. But as I said, they've got the expertise, and that's what we want to do, is put our resources behind their expertise to make things happen.
Right. So when we are thinking about affordable housing and all these things we just talked about in a big global aspect, we have barriers in our community to creating affordable housing. And so what kind of tools are available to cities and towns? I know I always enjoyed that quote that you attribute to Mayor Driscoll, or Lieutenant Governor Driscoll, about when he gets to have an address to it, it becomes somewhat different in people's views. But the kind of tools like deed restrictions or incentives we do have in our zoning, for instance, that developments require a certain number of affordable units depending on the size of the development. Right. Those kind of tools. Are there tools like that we should be thinking about and developing?
Yeah, well, let's start with barriers, because I think one of the biggest barriers, as I mentioned, is the neighborhood opposition. So it's like we need to get in there early, not there with, here's our final plans, here's what we're doing, folks, then have it shot down. It's like, get in there on the ground floor and say, here's what we're thinking, how can we make it work for you in the design process too. So like I said, it's not square pegs going in round holes. It's something that fits within the neighborhood. As far as the tools go, well, one thing we're actually doing, as I mentioned, the AMI, we're stuck in the Greater Boston numbers, which are really inflated for what our actual income is. So Tony Gross, the city councilor at large, he put the bug in my ear. He had reached out to Congressman Seth Moulton's office and talked to see if there's a way about getting us out of that. I guess Framingham or Fitchburg, I can't think of which city it was, city or town, they were able to sort of separate from that number. And so we actually have a Zoom meeting set up next week with Seth Moulton and members from HUD to see if we can possibly head down that road. Some of the other tools, as I mentioned, was having some funding in the Affordable Housing Trust, which has not really had a lot for many years, and just having a ready, willing, and able community development department that's ready to help move along these projects. And I think one of the other barriers, too, is, I guess, a misunderstanding of what affordable housing is. I mean, people instantly go to government subsidized housing, which has an absolute need and should not be looked down upon. But affordable housing is for housing for our firefighters, teachers, policemen, people who make a decent wage. I mean, I believe the number for a family of four is somewhere in the high 60s to $70,000 a year. I mean, that's not like poverty level, but affordability, that high pay or relatively decent pay and the high cost of living here and high cost of rentals and purchases here, really there's an offset. So if we can get some success with Seth Moulton's office, I think we're on to something. No guarantees there, but I think the outreach is the first step to trying to get somewhere on it.
Yeah. So you mentioned something a couple of times in that last answer that's something that we dealt with for years, which is the neighborhood character. And our zoning, a couple of places in our zoning ordinance now requires when the city council or the zoning board of appeals is looking at a variance, they have to take into account the neighborhood character.
Right.
There's other parts that say, you get to take into account if the views are being blocked, et cetera. There's a lot of subjective parts of this, and I think that's one of the things you touched on with the reaction to zoning changes. People get very emotional about that.
Well, it's an emotional subject, so understandably so. The housing production plan, which was started in 2017, released in 2017, and expired in June 2022, is what this current city council took up in the early spring of 2022 after they took office. And what started by, I think it was coincidence, but it led to conspiracy theories. So the housing production plan came up with these ideas of how we could do some modifications to our zoning that should help with production. And you mentioned the numbers in the schools. It's because we have an aging population. So it's not necessarily we've had 1,300 students choice out. That's not the case at all. I mean, we do have an issue without school choice out, but we have an aging population, less school-age kids living here. So we're going forward with the zoning changes that were suggested, and then in the meantime, the MBTA TOD sort of comes over the wire, and so people were like, "Oh, we're just doing this because of the MBTA zoning," and I wish that the council had taken up the ones that were very related to the TOD, but they did, and a lot of them got shot down. Fast forward, here we are again, and the 3A, which has been super controversial. I'm not a super fan of it, and I don't think one size fits all. However, it is a law. We've got some people running for different offices out there who say they're just going to say no and not comply. We are currently in interim compliance. We had to do that by the end of last calendar year. By virtue of me filling out an online form, we're in interim compliance. So those who keep saying it's an option are sadly mistaken. The Attorney General, Andrea Campbell, made very clear in a memo she released, I believe in March or April of this year, that this is not optional. You cannot opt out. When you're looking at a law that's like a paragraph long and it uses words like shall, must, will, it takes away a lot of the ambiguity of whether this is optional. And she made it very clear in her memo that originally it was 3 grant opportunities we may not qualify for. Her memo now has it up to 13. That was in March. I don't know what it's at today. And that we, the city, could be liable for civil fair housing lawsuits if we don't comply. And to be a little more specific, there was one community that has decided not to get into interim compliance, and they are currently being sued. There were 5 communities that didn't get into interim compliance in the first pass at this early in 2022, they had a 10% cut to their housing authorities. This is real. This is not a joke. Our housing authority, David Holden, who's currently in charge of the Gloucester Housing Authority, forwarded an email to me he received earlier in the spring, basically saying if your city doesn't comply, you are potentially going to see a hit to your budget. I was at a Mass Municipal Association meeting with mayors down in Everett about 2 or 3 weeks ago. Governor Healy was there, and during her Q&A, I asked her about this very issue, and I says, I think you, the government, the administration, need to do work on your messaging, because this is the issue we're having. And when I was talking to the other mayors, they're in a similar situation where there's this disbelief that it's real. And I says, you need to also throw a few more carrots and a lot less sticks if you want this to work. But we have to comply by the end of this fiscal year, this calendar year, 2024, January 31st, December 31st, 2024, we have to be in full compliance. How we get there is not just me telling the planning board and the community development to just do some zoning changes that work for the compliance. I've wrapped this into basically our new master plan. One of the complaints during the last round of the zoning discussion was we shouldn't do anything without a master plan because our master plan is 23 years old, and I agree with them. So that's why we kicked off the master plan, the community planning initiative, and that will look at what our city is supposed to look like, what our desires are, our vision for the next 10 years, and the zoning will be part of that. So we can sort of overlap what the zoning suggestions are with what the desires are, and hopefully that's what's compliant with the state. But some of the silly ones that when we talked about the zoning from the last go-around, in certain zones downtown, if you own a piece of land, you can buy right, build a two-family home. If you have a single-family home and you tear it down, you can buy right, build a two-family home. If you have a single-family home, you need a special permit to build a second unit. That just seems like it was very low-hanging fruit, and hopefully we can get that one to pass.
Right.
And not to carry on, but if I may, one of the issues that people talk about is
the character of zoning, by the way, carrying on.
Carrying on.
Yeah.
This is one of the pieces of pushback is this is a developer's dream. It's like, well, it's not as likely that a developer is going to grab that single family home and tear it down and build 2 units, But who might want to add the second unit? Look at my father's house, the one I mentioned we just sold. My sister had a toddler, and she became a widow. My father built, not him, he couldn't pound a nail. He hired a contractor to build a second unit on his house. And the vision was she'll live there until she's ready to move on, and then it becomes rental income for him and my mother as they go into their golden years. And that's exactly what it became. So it's more likely that the homeowner looking for a place for their older child or a younger family looking to find a place for their senior parents, they'll want to build that second unit. Not necessarily the developer looking to spin off 2 condominiums for $800,000 a piece.
Yeah. One thing that perhaps would be helpful to the voters and to all of the citizens, when we've talked a lot about the MBTA transportation-oriented district requirement that the state has given us, just what does the state asking us to do? Can you give us that in a couple of words?
Well, it's basically, a lot of it comes down to by right zoning. And just to clarify, because there's a misconception out there, the MBTA, I know you're a trained guy, so don't get offended. The MBTA is in a bit of disarray, and their efficiency isn't what it could be. And so people say, why would we want to do zoning for MBTA when they can't even run the trains? Well, it's just the name. The MBTA has nothing to do with the zoning. Right. It's just, what do you call it? MBTA communities. We're one of 175, I believe it is. Mm-hmm. And because we have communities that have train service, subway service, or bus service, fall into that category. And all 175 of us are required to comply with 3A. So it's basically to create more housing. The governor has made it very clear. I think we're about 200,000 units behind right now. The numbers do work out to be, if all the zoning went in place to meet 3A, could result in 2,270 units. It is a mandate to zone. It is not a mandate to build. I had one city councilor argue with me that the state's going to make us build on Burnham's Field. That is complete baloney. There's nothing out there that says we have to build on Burnham's Field. I don't think the state is looking us to take open space that's protected and make housing. They want us to have the zoning in place. As I said, Do I think it's a great idea? Not necessarily. Do I think one size fits all? Absolutely not. Are we going to get in compliance? As long as I'm the mayor, yes, we are.
Right. And so the goal of the state is to have cities and towns that have service from the MBTA increase the density around the stations, theoretically, so people will
Theoretically,
use
yes.
public transportation as part of their life. And that's what
Well, and if you look at over the last few years, I think in the last census, I think we lost one congressperson because of our decrease in population. So I think the state's looking at it that way. We are losing population. We're not just looking at Gloucester. We're looking at the whole 351 communities. The state is losing population to our neighbors. And there are
Right.
many reasons why, but one of them is the high cost of housing because of a lack of housing.
Yeah. So you mentioned not wanting to do any significant zoning changes without updating the master plan. And you have commenced a process where the master plan will be updated. What specifically are you thinking this updating of the master plan can do to help with zoning?
Well, one of the main things to take into consideration for the now 23-year-old master plan is just think about where we were technologically 23 years ago. You know, we were still using VHS tapes, rented VHS tapes. DVDs were just coming out. Cell phones were a lot bigger and not smart. You know, there was no high-definition TV. There were just so many things that 23 years ago we don't deal with today. So just by virtue of that small tidbit of information, it is time for an update. We have a very different city today, and we'll have a very different city tomorrow. But the idea is to bring people together. I'm sure you were involved in Plan 2000 and how they went. In my case, I went as a resident to West Parish School, where former Councilor Christine Rasmussen was the facilitator there. And that's what they did. They went around to all the schools and all the other buildings, public buildings and others, to get input. And I'm not talking about input from dozens or even hundreds. We need input from thousands of people. We have roughly 29,600 or so people in the city. And we can't come up with a master plan that was put together by input from, 125 people. So keep your eyes open. This is going to be big news and a big job for all of us. It's going to take all of us to work on this to make sure that our vision is really our vision. And the thing is to not just create a multi-page document to stick on a shelf and ignore for 23 years. And I'm not necessarily saying that's what happened with the Plan 2000, but we have to make sure that whatever we come up with, we start to put into place on a strategic timeline to make sure we have that incremental improvement for our city. We don't want to be surprised when government comes down with the next bright idea. We want to be ahead of the game.
Right, but with this transit-oriented district that we're supposed to create by the end of 2024, and it's a mandate.
Correct.
It's a zoning mandate. What will the master plan help us? How will that help us make that zoning change? What will it inform us?
Well, I think that's going to be part of the discussions as we go around, because I don't have the answer at this moment. I mean, if I did, I would have just typed up a bunch of zoning amendments and passed them on to the council. But it's not me. It's the big chunk of the 29,600 or so people. So as we go around, we talk about to the people about what do you envision for Gloucester, and then we'll be able to formulate how zoning fits into that. Because as I said, they have to be two sides of the same coin, because it can't just be, well, here's these zoning things that we know are compliant, and here's the vision of the city. And because if they're sort of like two magnets that are just repelling each other, I think we're just looking for trouble. So again, it's not for me to decide here or even over the next few months. It's for us collectively to decide. And then as we move forward with the process through the planning board and ultimately the next city council, people will have another bite at the apple to say their piece about what's being proposed.
Yeah. And do you see any positives coming from this requirement that we rezone around the train stations? Things that could really help the city in terms of our character and these problems that we've identified for housing?
Well, I think the big thing as far as our character goes, we have to make sure that whatever we do doesn't destroy our character. And I think that's part of some of the opposition just go right to that is going to destroy our character. Well, anything can destroy your character if you're not paying attention and setting some strict guidelines of what your expectations are. If it creates more housing opportunities without creating eyesores every 5 feet, that is a plus for the city. I want my daughter lives in Salem now. She'd like to move back to Gloucester. She makes decent money. but there's not a lot for her to choose from. There are people here who are moving out. They're living in mom's basement or still in their childhood bedroom, and they're going to rent their first apartment in some other town, and they'll be contributing to those communities and not ours. So, and it does bring new people, and I know some people talk about the generational roots and how that's so important. It is. But the newcomers, my grandparents were newcomers. Everybody's grandparents were newcomers at one point. As new people come in, they bring new ideas, new energy. So it's a combination of keeping housing, making more housing available for the people who want to stay, and making housing available for people who want to come and be part of our community.
Right. And so just kind of to finish up that thought, so you were on the city council and you had to approve zoning variances just as I did, and there was always that, part where we're supposed to take into account the neighborhood character.
The 5 criteria.
So
right.
how do you do that? How did you do that as an individual counselor?
Yeah, well, it's not always easy, and it's a case by case basis. Like, some of the zoning changes we made while I was there was, for instance, the Beauport Hotel. Neighborhood character. Well, it replaced an old cinder block building. So, and in retrospect, 10 years into the future, it was a positive for the neighborhood character. So I guess you have to look at it, again, it's a case-by-case basis. If we're talking about somebody who wants to put, a 5-story Halyard-like building in the middle of Chestnut Street, maybe that doesn't necessarily fit the neighborhood character. But in a neighborhood that's already got 2 and 3 family units, and somebody puts a nondescript unit in the back that you can't really tell, it's still a colonial, that's a whole different story. So again, it's a case-by-case basis, which will be up to the planning, zoning, and the city council. But as far as what we put forward with suggested zoning changes, that's going to be one of the things I'm concerned about, is making sure the character of our city remains.
Yeah. So one of the things that derailed the 2-family conversion.
Not the best word for MBTA zoning.
No, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Everybody gets the point. They understand what I'm talking about. So that was the thing that I heard most during those discussion of all those things that came out of the housing production plan that resonated with me was people saying, I would, this by right, which
Yes.
is contrary to I want to have a say with what happens next door to me.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we begin to think about that, since that's obviously going to be a key element of this new zoning that we're going to have to do
Right.
with its density? It's do we give the residents some say, but still have by right happen?
Right. I think that it's not as simple as by right, you just go pull a building permit and build it. Because a lot of especially downtown, a lot of the lots are legal non-conforming. So they still would have to go through zoning to get relief, whether it's setbacks or height or whatever else it is. So there is still that opportunity. Again, that's why I still don't think a one-size-fits-all is necessarily the best thing for us or the Commonwealth as a whole. But there are still those guardrails in place.
Okay. So we promised this audience that we would take some questions.
Sure.
And so we will do that now. We have 20 minutes left in our hour. So maybe if Ryan could raise the house lights a little bit. And Deanna, do you want to take the microphone? We have a microphone, and Deanna will take that microphone and take it to the gentleman whose hand is raised right there.
Dan, I think the mic is turned off.
You have to speak right into these mics.
Okay. Hello, Mayor.
Hello.
Not necessarily a housing question, but what do you think your major accomplishments have been over the last 2 years, and what do you hope to achieve going forward if you're reelected?
Okay, well, first of all, it's only 22 months, but just to put a little, cherry on top. But I think we've accomplished quite a lot, and I say I always used to sort of chuckle to myself when politicians would say, "We did this," but it is we. It's a team effort. It's not just me. It's my staff in my office. It's the managers, the middle managers, and every person down the line. Things like completing the Magnolia Pier that had just been sitting in limbo, moving along with the the new softball field at Green Street Playground. That's been a big one. I would say by far and away, the biggest success story is the beach reservation system, which virtually eliminated beach traffic. Kicking off this comprehensive planning initiative is a big one because it's going to be our identity for the next decade and beyond. Finally tackling the secondary treatment plant. I mean, I always ask this, who here flushes? I think everybody, right? Not an exciting or sexy subject to talk about, but anybody who saw Paul alluded to the Mayor's Forum, everyone at the panel from Bill Squillis right through to Svathia talked about the things that they inherited from before them, and Bill started off by mentioning kicking the can down the road. And so when it got to me, I pointed to all of them, kick, regarding the sewer treatment plant, which we've been on a waiver for 40 years, and now finally we're going to tackle it. It's going to be not a fun process going forward. We're trying to find sources of funding from I've been, leveraging my relationships with Margaret Fronte and Senator Tarr and Seth Moulton, as well as the governor, lieutenant governor, and we are finally going to crack that nut. And so those are, I think, the biggest things. And I look forward to the next 26 months, finishing off this term and into the next term to continue that kind of great work.
Okay. Any another question?
Yeah,
ahead.
hello, Mayor.
Hi.
This is just a question in general. You talked about the MBTA developments that's going in and was it 2,200 or whatever units that hope
that
to
might
be developed. And I just wonder, so who is it for? I mean, I assume we all want Gloucester to be a working and living community, and not just vacation homes and sleeping community. So with these development, with this going on, is there any way assuring that this actually benefit people that live in Gloucester and works and live here, and not just going to have people moving in from outside and increasing? How do you see, how is this benefiting in our community for being a living and working community?
Right. Well, if we're talking like onesie, twosie things, like somebody's put in a second unit or a third unit on the house, it goes on the market, it's sold to the highest bidder, and hopefully as there are more and more units, supply and demand brings the prices down. If you're talking bigger projects, like the Y project, the old Y project for affordable senior housing, there is a preference or sort of a set aside for Gloucester residents. That's about it. I know that people talk about the influx of outsiders coming here. Our population has been pretty steady for nearly 100 years.
Over here. Yes.
Hi. I heard you talk a lot tonight about the city trying to find space to build affordable housing. And obviously we're an island and there isn't a ton of space. But I'm curious as to whether or not you have looked into the regulation of Airbnbs, because those short-term housing do detract a lot, from our ability to have long-term housing. And it's something that the city does not have to find space for. So, there's 500 units that are short-term housing being used as Airbnbs. That's 500 units that we could have as long-term housing.
Thanks. There was an attempt by Councilor Gross to do a ordinance that would regulate that, and it is a function of the city council ordinances. I don't think he got too far. He got a lot of pushback, and he is still working on it. So hopefully in the next term he will reintroduce something. But that's about it. It would be an ordinance to limit it, and I think the number is maybe higher than the 400 you said. So even though I mentioned earlier we put the dedicated fee into the Affordable Housing Trust, as I mentioned, $65,000 this year, $56,000 the year before. That's still not a lot of money. So we're not getting a lot of bang for our buck out of it. In my opinion, it's a symbolic account, and that's the only answer I can offer. Is it would be a council ordinance.
So just to follow up on that, when we're talking about this comprehensive planning process, isn't something like that a subject that would be a good subject to get people's feedback on? Do we as a city want to limit the ability of citizens to use their property for Airbnbs or put restrictions on them. Is that something that we want to do, or do we want to find out from our citizens? Is that what they want?
Well, I think that nothing is off the table as far as what's up for discussion during the comprehensive planning initiative. So the short answer is yes, that can be part of it. So, and I would think that Tony would be gauging and following the process for the planning initiative as he develops a potential ordinance change.
Sure. Do we have any other hands up?
Thank you. So I am, you've been talking a lot about community, and how do you get community to talk to each other? Like, you know, you're assuming that the community, I mean, there aren't that many people here tonight. Gloucester needs to have more involvement in our city, and the people need to come out. So what are you going to do to get us out?
All right, specifically to the community planning initiative, I think that's probably the big enchilada, that one. And the outreach leading up to the kickoff on, I think it was September 9th, was pretty extensive, and we will continue. We have partners like 1623. We have Joey C's Good Morning Gloucester. It's got, I think, 85,000 followers. So we're doing the outreach, and obviously the Gloucester Daily Times, and as well as social media. And it's a matter of people sharing it. So we will be plugging this extensively because, as I said, I don't want to have this. We should just throw the plan away if in the end it's like 100 and something people that show up. This has got to be thousands of people that show up to give their ideas. So I hear you. It's difficult. You know, it's the old, you can lead a horse to water. I mean, we can put ads in the paper. We can give interviews. We can have press releases. But, you know, if it's just not coming through people's algorithm on their feed on Facebook. Yeah. She said, "What about town halls?" So that's a great idea. And that's one good thing is we have 9 city councilors, and that's for at least the 5 wards, something that could be happening regularly on a ward-based approach, and then the at-large councilors could do something on a citywide approach. So that's like 9 ambassadors that could help spread the word on any given topic on any given day. Okay.
Thank you. Other questions from the audience?
Hi. I wonder, there's a lot of underutilized space in Gloucester. There are a lot of houses that aren't being used year-round, and I'm sure there are industrial and commercial spaces too that are open and underutilized. I'm wondering if there's any thought to having part of the property tax structure incentivize the use of underutilized spaces for short-term rentals or under-market rentals to keep some of our young workers here, our artists here, and others who can't afford full market rates.
That's a great idea. To say honestly, we haven't been discussing that, but that's worthy of an in-depth conversation about. Similar but not the same is the pop-up shops that are in the old Cameron's building, you know, the new building where the Cameron's building was, are rental spaces, retail spaces that weren't being rented. And so Action has been working with us through a state grant to provide these pop-ups. And I think there have been 4 or 5 businesses. 2 more will be announced in the coming weeks. So yeah, it's worth looking at. I know we do have an empty building a fee. I can't think of the right. Basically, if your storefront's empty, you get charged for it. Luckily, down on Main Street, we've had a few that have been filled in, and hope to get more stuff filled in because it's like just like a missing tooth when you just go down the Main Street and it sticks out, to use another body part of analogy, like a sore thumb. So it's missing tooth, sore thumb, and we want to avoid that.
We have one behind you again.
Thank you. I appreciate this conversation. Thank you for being here. For local real estate agents, their livelihood is selling homes and making a commission. Have we explored any other towns, cities that have been successful incentivizing, inviting the real estate agent community to be a part of these conversations as they are engaging with sellers and as they're engaging with buyers, to really try to find the right mix of individuals and families who are affordable, able to afford homes, to stay here, to build generational wealth. I'm just curious, like, I don't have an answer for it, and I'm curious if any other cities, towns, municipalities have explored ways to proactively engage them so that they're not disincentivized. Of course, they want to sell a home for the highest possible price per your father's home, for example. So I'm just wondering if we could get creative in exploring that as well.
Well, I mean, one thing to keep in mind, a lot of our real estate agents are involved in lots of boards and commissions, so that they have a community outlook. And as a recovering real estate agent, I think it's important to defend them, because they get beat up a lot about they're just greedy. It's all greed. It's greed. But as I said, there's a lot of people who are on volunteer boards within the city, city government. There are people who are volunteering for all these nonprofits that are real estate agents, so they really care. And I'm sure that they'd be happy to look at some sort. I think we have at least a couple in the room. And maybe when we're offline, we could talk about the potential of putting together some kind of a ad hoc committee that could look into things like that.
Anyone else? We have time for one more.
I just want to follow up a little bit with the whole real estate situation here, and we all know it's getting more and more expensive. And at the same time, we want to do development and putting up new units, and usually it's our smaller units, 1 and 2, like the Highland and things like that. So are you afraid of that Gloucester will become like a 2-tier community, where you have those that are or qualify for affordable housing, and then you have those that can afford $1 million or more for some housing, and then nothing in between? And if you are concerned about that, what can be done to avoid that from happening?
Yeah, there's always that bit of concern in the back of my head. But this is cyclical. I mean, I was in real estate for 15 years, and there were peaks and valleys, and unfortunately we're at an extreme peak here, like Mount Everest on steroids. So there's always been that fear that it's going to be the super rich who can afford to live here and the super poor who are getting subsidized to live here. But there are steps. We just spent the last hour or so talking about ways we can address it, and it's got to be incremental change. So your question was, do I have that fear? Yes, that is a fear I have. But I have 2 reasons to make sure that isn't what happens when I hand the baton to the next mayor, and that's my grandson and my granddaughter.
So I'll ask the last question. We've heard several comments from the audience tonight about process and about some pretty good ideas that could be incorporated into the work of this comprehensive planning effort. Mm-hmm. So how do you, as the chief executive, take the leadership role in making sure that this process gets that sort of thing going and recorded and analyzed? Right.
Well, that is probably the prime directive for me as the next mayor, because I plan on winning, for the next 20 months or so, because we have to have, we've got the comprehensive planning initiative, and I mentioned the 3A requirements. So we can't send those to the city council in December, because they have to vote. It's going to be a lot of kicking around of the zoning amendments before they're ready for a vote at the city council. So we've got a lot of work to do, and a year is kind of a short amount of time still, even for city government. So it is my job, my prime directive, to make sure we are spreading that word, and I'll take every opportunity to do it. And as I said, we have 9 ambassadors on the current city council, and there will be 9 and guaranteed to be new councilors in the next city council session. And collectively we can do it, because each one of you all have a mail list, email list, you all have, well, not all of you, many of you have social media profiles. Just spread the word. Even you don't even give an opinion whether you think it's good or bad. Just say, this is going on. and just start sharing it. Check the city's Facebook page, check the mayor Facebook page, Gloucester Housing for All. I'm sure a lot of our partners will be sharing this information. So as I said, we can't have dozens of people, hundreds of people. We need thousands of people to show up. And this isn't like a one-day show up. This is multiple opportunities over the next several months to have your voice heard and have your voice listened to and have your voice incorporated into our vision for the next 10 years.
So, Mayor Verga, I want to thank you on behalf of Housing for All Gloucester and all the voters for participating tonight and for giving some really thoughtful answers on this very difficult issue. And I think we should give the mayor a round of applause.
Thank you all.
And as I said after we finished with the councilors at large, and being an old president of the city council, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I was saying I should have brought my guitar. It would have been very comfortable sitting right here. But
Thank you all for
Thank
coming
you.
and watching.